Guys, so glad to be back with you for another Bible study as we're making our way through Genesis and eventually Exodus. Today, we're going to be looking, if you have been paying attention to the schedule, we're going actually through Genesis chapters 6 through 9, four full chapters, and also two chapters away from what we did previously. We're skipping ahead a little bit, and also we're looking, we're going to kind of dissect because today we're going to be looking at the story of Noah. Now, in your own study time, I encourage you to go through the story of Cain and Abel, look at Genesis chapter 5, right? Kind of pay attention to some of these things. But in terms of we're trying to get a broad Bible study going of the books of Genesis and Exodus, want to get a good scope of all the things that are included here. And so in the story of Noah is where we will, continue in our Bible journey, right? But we're going to kind of jump around a little bit because the story of Noah is probably one that a lot of people are familiar with from like a kids ministry perspective. However, when the story of Noah is generally told, it's often told from the perspective of like, hey, the floods came, but here, look at this boat, look at all the animals on it. And then, oh man, the Lord provided, here's a rainbow, right? And you kind of miss out on a lot of the bigger picture stuff and a lot of some of the deeper theological impacts, right? But I really want to dive into this. So, as we dive into the verses, we're going to jump around a little bit. We're not going to just, take it all one chunk, right? We're going to take little bits, and you'll see what I mean. So, starting in Genesis chapter 6, we're actually going to go to verse 5. It says, "When the Lord saw that the human wickedness was widespread on the earth, and that every inclination of the human mind was nothing but evil all the time, the Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and he was deeply grieved. Then the Lord said, I will wipe mankind, whom I created off the face of the earth, together with the animals, creatures that crawl, birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them." Now, I want to dive into this really fast because this might seem insignificant to you. This might be a thing that you read and just power through, and if so, great, right? But the implication of God regretting, of God being deeply grieved by something, is a really interesting theological conundrum because we generally tend to think of regret and grief in our own ways. When I think of regret, I think of something that I have done wrong, or that something that has gone wrong that I regret, something that I need to repent of, something that is not good. And when we think of God regretting something, deeply grieving something, of regretting mankind and the creation because it's evil and wicked, it makes us go, did the Lord not foresee this? Was God not powerful enough to stop it? Is he changing his mind? Is he fickle, right? Is he prone to weakness of some sort? And the answer is no. But we have to kind of understand the nature and character of God to really understand this, because it is God in the perfection of his knowledge, the perfection of his power, the perfection of his love, and the perfection of his emotions, where he is able to create a world where evil is a choice, right? Like we talked about that last week, right? Where there is a possibility that people are going to choose against him, and by choosing against him, there is the downfall of creation. There is brokenness that enters the world. The Lord was not taken surprised by these things. He was perfect in his knowledge, and he's also perfect in his love. He's allowing these people that he loves to choose whether to love him or not. And even when they would choose against him, he's going to keep pursuing them in love, right? And he is powerful enough where he can do something about it, right? He says, I see this evil and I hate it. I regret it. I deeply grieve the sadness of this brokenness, and I'm going to punish evil, right? This leads to another characteristic of God that we have to address, is that God is just. God cannot look at wickedness and evil and do nothing. It's the reason that he couldn't keep Adam and Eve in the garden. God and sin cannot be together, right? So God has to punish sin and wickedness and evil. So that is what is happening here. This is an example of God's wrath, and this points us ahead to the wrath that we have avoided by being with Jesus, right? And this whole passage is going to be an interesting one. Of usually we see the Lord's blessing and favor, and that's, I was like, oh yeah, like that's how Jesus appears, is through this grace. We're also seeing Jesus in God's wrath because that is what he took upon himself. This is the punishment of our sin, right? We continue. It says, Noah, however, found favor with the Lord. And There's some really interesting, Hebrew stuff here where the name Noah is actually a play on words with with the words favor, with the words, rest, with all these things. Like, there is a through line of Noah's name, his like actual Hebrew name, that would point to the fact that he is resting, that he is favor, he is all these things of the Lord that he is providing, right? It says, these are the family records of Noah. Noah is a righteous man, blameless among his contemporaries. Noah walked with God, and Noah fathered three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with wickedness. God saw how corrupt the earth was, for every creature had corrupted its way on the earth. Then God said to Noah, I've decided to put to an end to every creature, for the earth is filled with wickedness because of them. Therefore, I'm going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it with pitch inside and outside. And then he describes how to make the ark, which we don't need to go into in our Bible study. And we skip down to verse 17. It says, understand that I'm bringing a flood waters on the earth to destroy every creature under heaven and with the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark with your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives. You are also to bring into the ark two of all the living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. Two of everything, from the birds according to their kinds, from the livestock according to their kinds, and from the animals that crawl on the ground according to their kinds, will come to you so that you can keep them alive. Take with you every kind of food that is eaten, gather it as food for you and for them. And Noah did this. He did everything that God commanded him, right? And you're going to see that phrase kind of throughout these chapters, right? And even though we're skipping some sections, I encourage you, read not only the ones that we're missing before this Bible study, read the entirety of 6, 7, 8, 9, right? To get the full scope of the story of Noah. But in this, right, you're seeing the fulfillment, the fullness of God's wrath. He's saying, I am going to destroy. And oftentimes, again, when we read the story of Noah, we kind of just go, the earth flooded. And so the Lord was like, it's like this was an inescapable, event. No, this is an act from God. It is a purposeful act of wrath and judgment from the Lord. We kind of have to deal with that. That's not a thing that feels great. And I encourage you, sit in that awkwardness, sit in that uncomfortability to go, like, how does this make you feel? The Lord is destroying things. Does that make you feel okay? And how can we reconcile that with the God of love, with the Father, with the Creator, right? The person who made all things, right? It's the fact that God is just. God has to punish sin and wickedness, right? And he is going to establish a covenant later where he won't do this. Again, he will not destroy, but that doesn't remove the wickedness from man, and he still has to figure out a way to deal with it, right? He doesn't have to figure out, God has already figured out, right? But he has to determine a new thing to deal with the sin and wickedness of humanity. Right now, that is eradicating, destroying everything, and that is within God's justice. And oftentimes when we think of God's justice, we say God is just, right? Or God is merciful. It's easy to look at specific passages and just go, this is God showing his judgment. This is God showing his grace. But the reality is God's always won. God doesn't turn off his justice to show grace. He does not turn off his mercy to be, to judge and show wrath, right? That's not how God operates. He is all of himself all of the time. And so in these moments of judgment and wrath, he is also gracious and merciful. And how do we see that? Because he's providing for Noah. He is lovingly dealing with sin. He like someone in love and grace does not allow sin to continue to fester, right? He's also providing a family to establish the world, to make sure that grace and kindness and mercy continues, that righteousness continues. And he's providing all these things for him. He's telling him what to do. And one of the things you're going to see is Noah did everything that God had commanded to him. We see very little from Noah in terms of dialogue, in terms of personal stuff. But what we do see is that he's a man who pursued the Lord, who was righteous, and who did what he was commanded to do. If that is the best thing that we can be told, man, what a beautiful, truth that is for us, that we are people who did what was commanded of us, that we are people who were obedient. So that's chapter 6. Chapter 7, we're actually going to predominantly skip. Now that's interesting because if you're looking at your Bibles, chapter 7 is the flood. That's kind of the big deal of the Noahic story, is the fact that the world flooded. But for a Bible study's sake, that's not necessarily the most theological deep things, right? We could look and basically from beginning of chapter 7 to the end, you're seeing God tell Noah, hey, I'm about to flood the world, so you should get in the ark now. Then he gets in the ark and they wait 7 days and he's like, all right, I'm flooding the world. And then the rains start and the waters rise from the earth and all the things in the world floods. And they are in the boat for a little over a year. And it's basically like giving a, in-depth look at like, here are the amounts of times that they were in the boat, and this is the amount of time it was raining, and this is when it stopped raining, this is how long it stayed, and then once it starts going down, and then they send this bird out and it comes, and then they sent another bird out and it comes back, and then they send a bird out and it stays, right? It's all these things. It's like, that's neat story stuff, but from a like Bible study perspective, that's not the stuff that we really need to get to. Now again, summarize it with your group. Have someone, like, I would say, like, hey, someone give me brief synopsis, what happens from the flood, like from the time it floods to when it stops, right? Brief moment. But we don't need to sit there and be like, what do the numbers represent, what do the birds represent, right? That's not what is important in this passage, right? This is the narrative saying it flooded, this is what happened, right? And so we pick up in verse 21, and again, I'm intentional with where we're starting because I want it to kind of feel uncomfortable a little bit. Verse 21 says, every creature perished, those that crawl on the earth, birds, livestock, wildlife, and those that swarm on the earth, as well as all mankind, everything with the breath of the spirit of life in its nostrils, everything on dry land. He wiped out, and he is God, right? He wiped out every living thing that was on the face of the earth, from mankind to livestock to creatures that crawl to the birds of the sky, that were wiped off the earth. Only Noah was left and those that were with him in the ark, and the water surged on the earth 150 days. That's 150 days after it's like it was raining, right? And it continues on in verse 8, right? Because that's a bleak passage. The Lord destroyed, he removed, he brought to perishment all of those creatures. That's a big deal. That's significant. But chapter 8, God remembered Noah, as well as all the wildlife and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. God caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the water began to subside. The sources of the watery depths and the floodgates of the sky were closed, and the rain from the sky stopped. We continue on in verse 14. By the 27th day of the second month, the earth was dry. And this is little over a year of Noah and his family being on this boat. Now, what's interesting is other mythologies, other cultures from around the world have a flood narrative, which speaks to something, right? This is an interesting passage to dive into from a literal perspective. Was the world completely covered in water? Now, could be, right? They've actually found it scientifically, like if all of the water from under the Earth's surface and all the water that's in the sky, like everything like could have covered the world. Is this the known world? Is this just their area where Noah was? We don't know, right? And that's not really the point. The point is that God is enacting judgment, that God is bringing punishment for wickedness and sin and evil, right? But he remembers the righteous. He remembers his people. He remembers the people who are walking with him, and he spares them. He is showing grace in the midst of judgment. He's showing love in the midst of wrath, right? This is the significance of this story, right? How it worked out in the logistics of things, don't know, right? But this is where we are reading, right? But I encourage you, have these conversations. Verse 15 says, then God spoke to Noah, come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out all the living creatures that are with you, birds, livestock, those that crawl on the earth, and they will spread over the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. And this passage in the following one in chapter 9 should immediately begin making us think back to Genesis chapter 1. It says, okay, go out, you and all the creatures that you have, right? Go about the earth, spread over the earth, be fruitful and multiply. He's He's continuing the command of creation. He's continuing the purpose and the role of creation. He's giving this, he's extending it to Noah, right? He's continuing this call. It says, so Noah, along with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives, came out. All the animals, all the creatures that crawl, and all the flying creatures, everything that moves on the earth came out of the ark by their families. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord. He took some of every kind of clean animal and every kind of clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. When the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, he said to himself, I will never again curse the ground because of human beings, even though the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth onward. And I will never again strike down every living thing as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night will not cease. Right? This is the Lord looking at Noah, who has created the first altar that we are aware of in Scripture. He creates this place to worship the Lord. And the Lord had said, hey, in addition to, this is the beginning of chapter 7, which we didn't read, in the addition to all these animals paired off that I've told you to bring into the ark, I also want you to bring some of these clean animals, some of these unclean animals, and some of blah, 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 right? He is preparing Noah to make an offering of sacrifice, of worship to him. Well, I don't know if Noah knew that at the time, right? But that is what he's doing. But Noah creates an altar and then offers a burnt offering to the Lord. And this is interesting because it is when the Lord smells the aroma of the burnt offering that he relents his wrath against humanity as a whole. Now, he had decreased the flood, right? But this is the moment where he says, I will not curse the ground. I will never again curse the ground. The ground is still cursed from the fall, but he is not going to do anything additional. He's not going to destroy humanity and creation like he just did, right? And this is, again, an interesting thing because is God moved by this sacrifice, or is he recognizing this is the interaction? Has he set in a system in place that recognizes that sacrifice needs to be made? And that is the proper way of doing things. Is like Noah providing anything? No. God provided all the things. He brought all the animals. He's the one that created all the things. But Noah is worshiping. He is the one making an offering of what he has from what the Lord has been given. And that is good for the Lord. He appreciates that. He recognizes that is worship. Now, the interesting tie-in here is that when Jesus is on the cross, he is going to offer himself as a sacrifice on behalf of all of us. And that is going to relent the wrath of God. Jesus is going to take upon himself the wrath of God. The wrath that we just saw displayed in this destructive flood, Jesus is taking upon himself so that we might be spared, so that we might live in favor and rest. Right, just as Noah's name would suggest, right? This is the good stuff for us to recognize. What does our worship look like? Are we offering ourselves as sacrifice? What are we bringing to the Lord? Everything we have is from Jesus, is from God, but are we bringing something in sacrifice, in worship to him so that he may be pleased, that he might smell the pleasing aroma of our sacrifice, right? That is the thing, because we don't live in this system of sacrificing animals anymore, but we do offer ourselves, right? Last chapter 9, we're moving into the Noahic covenant, right? And this is a really big deal. This is the first official covenant between God and humanity. I say official because some people consider the Adamic, that's Adam, or Adamic, whatever, covenant, where God says, be fruitful and multiply, have dominion, as a covenant. Could be, right? That depends on your theology, right? But this is the first one where God says, I will establish a covenant with you, right? It says, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear and terror of you will be in every living creature on earth, every bird of the sky, every creature that crawls on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. They are placed under your authority. Every creature that lives and moves will be food for you, as I gave the green plants, I have given you everything, right? He's reestablishing this original creation narrative, purpose, and be fruitful, multiply, have dominion. He's reestablishing this with no, this is still true. This is still the purpose of humanity. There's difficulties, right? But every creature is going to live in fear of you now, right? But this is still the purpose of humanity, is to be God's stewards of the earth, to live, to walk, to be fruitful, to multiply, to be God's representatives on earth. right? We continue, says, however, you must not eat meat with its lifeblood in it, and I will require a penalty for your lifeblood. I will require it from any animal and from any human. If someone murders a fellow human, I will require that person's life. Whoever sheds human blood, by human his blood will be shed, for God made humans in his image. But you be fruitful and multiply, spread out over the earth and multiply. This is kind of a weird little section in the middle of this passage, but it's really important. God is looking at the wickedness and the evil of humanity, starting with Cain and Abel, the first murder in history, right? Watching wickedness and evil descend upon humanity, right? And he's recognizing the value of human life. We talked about this in chapter 1 with us being made in God's image, but now he's directly saying it, right? He's like, why is he telling Noah and his future descendants, don't eat meat with blood in it? It's the same reason he's saying, hey, do not shed blood from other people, because blood means life. Life is important. We are made in God's image and you are valuable. And if you shed human blood, right, you are bringing the sword upon yourself. There is punishment for that, right? God views humanity, God views life with value and importance, and so should we, right? That's what he's talking about in this passage. Quick little aside, right? But continues, says, then God said to Noah and his sons with him, understand that I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, birds, livestock, and all wildlife of the earth that are with you, and all the animals of the earth that came out of the ark. I will establish my covenant with you, that never again will every creature be wiped out by floodwaters. There will never again be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant I am making between you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all future generations. I have placed my bow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I form clouds over the earth and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all the living creatures. Water will never become a flood to destroy every creature. The bow will be in the clouds, and I will look at it and remember the permanent covenant between God and all the living creatures on earth. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and every creature on earth, right? So this is our first covenant that we're speaking of, and we're going to see several incredibly important covenants throughout this series, right? We're starting with Noah. We're going to see the Abrahamic covenant. We're going to see the Mosaic covenant, right? If you were here with us a few years ago, we talked about the Davidic covenant, right? These are massively important for God's creation, and it starts here. And usually when we look at covenants, the covenant it's a way for us to just understand a binding agreement between two parties. It's more than a contract. It's more than just an agreement, right? It is something that is meant to be significant. And basically, instead, if you break this covenant, there's death, right? That is the meaning, right? Like, you cannot break a covenant. You're not supposed to, right? And in the ancient world, when we saw a covenant, the two ways that they would play out was either a mutually beneficial agreement between two equal parties. We are allies, we are partners, we're working together. You scratch my back, I scratch yours, right? That's the idea of like a mutually beneficial covenant. And the other one would be one, but like a subservient covenant. Like, this is a vassal relationship, right? Where a weaker party would offer goods, services, payment, servitude, whatever, to a stronger party, right? In order, like in exchange for protection, right? This is like a kingdom that is taking care of its vassal states, right? Saying like, hey, you pay taxes, we provide the army, kind of thing. You would never see a covenant like what God does, but this is how God operates. God's covenants are all for the blessings of us. We provide nothing to God. God gives us everything in exchange. There is wickedness and sin and evil, it still exists in the world, right? If we continue on in chapter 9, which we're not going to do in this Bible study, you're going to see Noah's sin, you're going to see his son's sin, right? You're going to see all these things that play out, and throughout Genesis, you're going to continue seeing the sin of man like openly there. Sin has not been solved, but God is choosing to bless humanity. He is choosing to not destroy them, to not display his wrath on them. He is operating on a different thing. He's going to give them grace. That's blessing. That is a huge deal for us. This covenant that he's making with Noah is like, I will not destroy you. It says by flood, right? But like, I will not destroy you, though you deserve it. Though humanity is still evil and wicked, their inclinations are towards evil and wickedness from their youth onward, right? Their minds are corrupted by evil and wickedness. but I won't destroy you. And how will you know this? That every time you look in the sky and there is a rainbow in the clouds, I will remember that, and I will see that, and I will remember I will not destroy you. And this is not because God forgets, but it is a way for us to like recognize some language that God is using, that He's saying, I see you, I understand you, and I always consider you, and I will not destroy you. Right? I will give you an opportunity to walk in righteousness, to walk in life. Right? There's nothing that Noah provides. There's nothing that humanity provides. He doesn't say, I won't destroy you so long as you live righteously, because if that was the case, we'd be destroyed. He doesn't say, I will not destroy you so long as you provide offerings and sacrifices that are acceptable. They don't do that. But God just says, I will do this for you. There's nothing in exchange. I will give you blessing. I will not destroy you, and I will provide. Go be fruitful and multiply, right? This is the significance of God covenants, and they're going to build on each other. We're going to talk about the Abrahamic covenant next week. We're going to see the Mosaic covenant, where God is saying, I will bless the earth. All peoples will be blessed. And my people will be the ones who enact this. And this is the big deal, right? Like, I'm choosing you. You're mine. It's a beautiful and wonderful thing, right? And I want us to recognize the power that is in that God considers us and remembers us and loves us and hears us and wants us so desperately that He blesses us when we give Him nothing in return. And if that's true, how should we live in response to God's blessings, to God's grace, to seeing God's judgment, to seeing the power that God has, right? How should we respond? In worship, in devotion, in righteousness, in evangelism, in whatever it might be. But we should be the people who are representing God on earth. We should respond in wonder and awe, right? This is the cool stuff of Noah's story. It is not just a guy on a boat. It is a wonderful story of God's wrath, His judgment, His grace, and His provision, right? It is all pointing ahead to Jesus, who will make the ultimate covenant with us, who will spill His blood and break His body so that we would enjoy the new covenant of eternal life with Him, that whoever believes in Him might be spared, might have life forever with Him, though we did nothing except provide the sin that nailed Jesus to the cross, that we will have life with Him forever. Guys, I hope you have an awesome time with this passage. Study all of the chapters, go through this whole section, and when you're working with your students in this, I would encourage you to really sit in those paradoxes, those dichotomies of the Lord, right? Look at His judgment, look at His grace, look at how these things interact together, and how do we feel about it? How do we feel about this, right? Like, this is important stuff. Dive into that. It's okay to go, this doesn't feel good, but how can we appreciate it instead? How can we appreciate that God wipes out everything? Because He is just. And if God did not deal with sin, He would not be a good God. He would not be just, right? But He still gives grace. He still gives blessing and love, though we don't deserve it. Guys, you're awesome. I hope you have a really fun time with this study, and I encourage you to really dive in. Take it easy.